What if one peaceful afternoon, one moment of joy, one simple trip to the park with your children was all it took for your world to shatter? What if, in the span of a heartbeat, a mother laughing with her sons became a suspect, a family became a threat, and the people sworn to protect them became the very danger they feared? This is not fiction. This is not an exaggeration. This is America, as too many black families know it. And today, you're going to witness the moment everything changed for one woman, a woman who wanted nothing more than to give her children a beautiful Saturday afternoon, and instead found herself fighting for their safety, their dignity, and their right to exist without fear. But what no one knew, not the officers, not the bystanders, not even the woman who phoned in the suspicious complaint, was this mother an elite federal agent, trained, disciplined, and unshakably brave? And when the line between harassment and danger was crossed, the truth they tried to bury burst into the light with a force no one saw coming. Before this story unfolds, before the corruption is exposed, before the city erupts, before a mother becomes the spark that ignites a national reckoning, ask yourself, what would you do to protect the people you love? And what would it take for you to finally say, enough? This story will shake you. It will make you angry. It will make you hopeful. And it will remind you just how powerful one voice can be when it refuses to be silenced. So before we begin, make sure you subscribe to Racial Truth, the channel dedicated to exposing the truth, sharing real stories of injustice, and inspiring the unity and courage America needs now more than ever. Hit that button, stay with us, and watch until the very end, because this is a story you will never forget. A Saturday that should have been ordinary. On warm afternoons, Cedar Ridge's Riverside Park had a way of convincing people that the world was gentler than it truly was. Sunlight spilled across the grass in sheets of honey gold, weaving through branches that swayed with slow, lazy confidence. Families dotted the open spaces, blankets spread out, coolers open, the air humming with little kid laughter and the soft rhythm of a place meant for peace. For once, Dr. Naomi Brooks allowed herself to believe in that peace. Her work at the FBI clung to her most days, even after she'd hung up her blazer and stepped into her home. Responsibility didn't switch off. Trauma from cases didn't soften easily. And the pressure, the constant pressure of being a black woman in a profession that watched her twice as closely and praised her half as often, left little room for afternoons like this. But today she was not Special Agent Brooks. Today she was simply Mom. "Micah," she called across the lawn. "Slow down a little, baby." Her 8-year-old son didn't even pretend to listen. His little legs pumped furiously under him as he ran with a football clutched to his chest, curls bouncing wildly. The boy moved with the untamed joy of someone who still believed the world was soft, safe, and good. Naomi wished she could freeze him like this, untouched by shadows he didn't yet see. A few yards behind him, 12-year-old Jalen jogged with his sketchbook tucked under one arm. He wasn't a runner by nature. His strengths were quieter: lines, shading, stillness, observation. But Micah's laughter was contagious, and even Jalen was willing to chase after him. Naomi sat on a weather-smooth bench, stretching her back into the slats and exhaling the exhaustion she'd been carrying for weeks. Her shoulders softened, her jaw eased, her heart unclenched. She hadn't had a day off like this in too long. She heard Jalen's voice, warm and teasing. "Mom, catch!" She looked up just in time to see the football wobbling toward her in the air. She reached for it and missed completely. The ball bounced off her palms and nearly knocked her sideways. Micah burst into laughter so bright it made nearby families glance over. Jalen doubled over, both hands on his knees. "Seriously?" Naomi said, pretending to be offended. "You two are going to laugh at your poor mother?" "You're too serious, Mom," Jalen teased, wiping his eyes. "You can't catch it if you're thinking about it like a homework assignment." "No," Micah protested, rushing to defend her. "Mom's good at everything." Naomi lifted a brow at Jalen, feigning menace. "Is that so? Maybe you boys forgot who taught your uncle how to throw spirals." "You're lying," Jalen said, but there was a flicker of doubt. Naomi rose, rolled her shoulders back, scooped up the football, and stepped into a smooth practice throw. The spiral she sent slicing across the air was so clean it looked choreographed. It hummed through the sky, cutting a perfect line. Jalen reached, it grazed his fingers, and shot right past him. "What?" he shouted, scrambling after it. "How did you— No way!" Micah clapped wildly. "Do it again, Mom." Naomi just smiled. "Told you." For a few precious minutes, life was simple. She was just a mother, barefoot in the grass, surrounded by laughter that belonged to her children. The simple joy of it almost made her dizzy. But joy for Black families often lived beside shadows. And Naomi felt a shift before she fully registered it. 20 feet away at a picnic table, a white couple sat quietly with their two children. The man scrolled through his phone without much interest. But the woman, she watched Naomi and the boys with a gaze so sharp it cut straight through the warm air. Her jaw was tight, her eyes narrow, her posture is stiff. Naomi knew that look. Black mothers across America knew it. It was a look that said, "Why are you here? Who are you? And why do you not fit where I think you should be?" At first, Naomi tried to shake it off. People stared sometimes, at her braids, her tattoos, her blackness, her maternal pride. She was used to it, but there was a difference between someone watching and someone evaluating. This woman was evaluating, judging, deciding. Naomi's chest tightened, though she kept her expression neutral. Her boys were still laughing. It was still a sunny day. She refused to let a stranger's prejudice poison this moment. But then the woman leaned closer to her husband and whispered something. This time Naomi heard her. "Suspicious. Watching all the kids. Those boys don't look like hers." Across the grass, Jalen's pencil froze above his sketchbook. His body stiffened. His gaze dropped to the ground. He'd heard it too. That was what broke Naomi's heart. Not the words, not the racism, not even the predictable suspicion. It was the way her son's joy disappeared, as if someone had snatched it straight from his hands. She knelt beside him. "Hey," she said softly, resting a hand on his shoulder. "Eyes on me, sweetheart." His throat bobbed. "Why do people do that, Mom?" Naomi blinked away the sting behind her eyes. "Because some people don't know how to mind their own business, but we're having fun. Don't let anyone take that from you." Micah bounded over, oblivious to the tension. "Mom! Tag? Please!" Naomi forced brightness into her voice. "Absolutely. But I'm warning you. I'm faster than both of you." Micah squealed and ran. Naomi followed at a playful jog, though she stayed aware of the woman's gaze. She moved in deliberate motions. Nothing sudden, nothing that could be twisted into something it wasn't. Black mothers learned early to modulate their presence in public spaces. Smile just enough. Stay visible. Stay calm. Don't give anyone an excuse. Behind her, the white woman's voice rose again, this time more urgent. "It doesn't look right. I'm telling you, something's off." Jalen drifted closer, leaning into Naomi's side. She pulled him into a quick hug. "We belong here just as much as anyone." But her stomach tightened. The air shifted. A tension pressed against the edges of the park, subtle but unmistakable. Then came the sound. A sound that every Black parent recognizes, even when they don't want to. Tires crunching on gravel. A patrol car is turning in. The white and blue vehicle rolled slowly through the lot, scanning the area in practice sweeps. The officers' faces were unreadable from afar, but their posture, hands positioned, gaze sharpened, telegraphed everything Naomi needed to know. Micah stopped running. Jalen's hand tightened around Naomi's. Naomi exhaled, steady but heavy. The easiest part of the day was over. She gathered both boys close. "Stay beside me. Don't move away, okay?" Her voice was firm, controlled, protective. She didn't sugarcoat danger, not for her children, not anymore. Not after years of training, and not after watching how quickly innocent Black lives could be rewritten as threats. The white woman at the picnic table straightened, satisfaction flickering across her face. She'd been waiting for this. Naomi felt anger bloom low and slow in her chest. Not hot, cold, controlled. An anger made of centuries, of stereotypes, of assumptions, of mothers who had to raise children in a world that questioned their right to exist. The officers stepped out of the car, their eyes locked onto Naomi and her children. She lifted her chin, squared her shoulders, and held both sons tighter. "You haven't done anything wrong," she whispered to them. "Remember that. Whatever happens next, we did nothing wrong." As the officers approached, and the sun glowed soft and deceptively warm, Naomi Brooks felt the beautiful afternoon collapse into something dangerous, familiar, and unforgiving. A day that should have been ordinary had already turned into something else entirely. Shadows in the sunlight. The officers closed the distance between the patrol car and the patch of grass where Naomi stood with her sons, their footsteps slow, measured, deliberate. It was the kind of walk meant to send a message before a single word was spoken. "We are in charge here. You are already on the defensive." Naomi felt Micah's small fingers curl tighter around her hand. Jalen shifted closer on her other side, his sketchbook pressed against his chest like a flimsy shield. The taller officer, mid-30s with light hair and a jaw clenched just a bit too tight, spoke first. "Afternoon, ma'am," he said, his tone polite in the way a warning sign is polite. "We received a call about some suspicious activity in the park." He didn't introduce himself. He didn't ask if she was okay. He didn't acknowledge the presence of two frightened children. Naomi glanced at his nameplate, Cole, then at his partners, Duggan. She memorized them without effort. Years at the Bureau had trained her to notice everything. Years as a black woman had taught her why she had to. "Suspicious activity?" she repeated quietly. "We're just here enjoying the park." Officer Cole's gaze shifted to Jalen and Micah, then back to Naomi. His eyes narrowed slightly, as if a formula in his head didn't quite add up, but he'd already decided the conclusion anyway. "We got a report about a woman here," he said, "possibly with kidnapped children." His tone hardened on the last two words. "Protocol requires us to investigate." There it was, that familiar choreography. Naomi kept her voice calm even. "These are my sons. We've been here for about an hour. We had ice cream, played some football, and now we're just finishing our day." Cole didn't answer. He shifted his weight, glancing at his partner. Officer Duggan stepped forward, his posture loose but his eyes sharp. "How about we ask the boys ourselves," he said, with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He dropped his voice into a higher sing-song tone as if speaking to toddlers. "Hey there, guys. Mind answering a couple of questions for us?" Naomi could feel Jalen flinch beside her. Micah pressed into her hip, his body trembling faintly. She wanted to step in front of them completely, shield them from everything, but doing too much, too fast, could be twisted into interference. Doing too little might fracture something in them she couldn't fix later. Her hands rested gently on their shoulders, grounding them. "It's okay," she murmured. "Just tell the truth. I'm right here." Officer Cole crouched slightly to Jalen's eye level and pointed his chin toward Naomi. "Is this really your mom?" he asked, a little too casually. "Do you know her full name?" The question floated in the air, poisonous in its simplicity. Jalen's voice was small, but it did not break. "Of course it's my mom," he said. "Her name is Dr. Naomi Brooks." Micah, desperate to be helpful, chimed in quickly. "She helps catch bad guys. She works for the—" "Thank you," Cole cut him off, the friendliness gone as quickly as it had appeared. He straightened, his expression cool. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see some identification." Naomi took a slow breath. She could feel the eyes of the park on her now. Families who had been pretending not to notice suddenly staring, some with sympathy, some with curiosity, some with that same suspicion she had felt earlier from the picnic table. The white woman who had made the call intentionally looked away when Naomi's gaze met hers, then leaned into her husband again, lips twitching in a grim imitation of concern. "Officers," Naomi said steady, "you've just heard my sons tell you who I am. We are not doing anything illegal. We're playing in a public park in the middle of the day. I'd like to know why we're being singled out." Dugan stepped in, hands resting lightly on his belt near his sidearm. "No one's singling anyone out," he said. "We're just following up on a concerned citizen's report. You should be grateful people are looking out for kids these days." Naomi's jaw tightened. "Funny," she said softly. "From where I'm standing, it doesn't feel like anyone's looking out for my kids." A murmur rippled through the growing circle of onlookers. A woman somewhere behind Naomi whispered, "Just leave her alone. They're not doing anything." Cole glanced toward the parking lot, where Naomi's SUV sat under a tree. "Actually," he added, almost as an afterthought, "that vehicle over there matches the description of one involved in some recent thefts in the area. I'm going to need to see your registration along with your ID." Naomi followed his gaze, then looked back at him. Her training, her years of reading faces in interrogation rooms, her experience with half-truths and bad lies, all of it lit up inside her like a warning flare. He was bluffing. "You and I both know that's not true," she replied quietly. "You're fishing, Officer Cole, and you're doing it in front of my children." Cole's eyes hardened. "Ma'am, if you continue to be uncooperative—" "I haven't been uncooperative," Naomi interrupted, though her tone remained controlled. "I'm stating facts. We have every right to be here." She could feel Jalen tremble beneath her hand, could feel Micah's fingers digging into the fabric of her jeans. "This isn't right," someone in the crowd said more loudly. Another voice added, "They're just a family. Leave them alone." Duggan shifted slightly to Naomi's left, adjusting his stance. It was subtle, just a few inches, a new angle. But she recognized it immediately, the way her training allowed her to recognize so many quiet threats. They were positioning themselves, framing her, containing her. "Ma'am," Duggan said, "this is the last time we're asking nicely. Produce your ID, or we can take this conversation downtown." The phrase hung heavy and deliberate. Downtown. Away from witnesses. Away from cameras. Away from her children. Naomi knew exactly what that meant. She had read too many reports, interviewed too many victims, and watched too many outcomes fracture along the lines of race, bias, and power. Her heart pounded, but her voice stayed level. "I have my ID in my bag," she said, announcing each word clearly, loud enough for the bystanders to hear. "I am reaching for it now, slowly. I am not a threat." She let her hand open, fingers spread, the universal sign for "I am not hiding anything." She moved in a deliberate arc toward her crossbody bag, telegraphing every inch of her movement. "Micah," she said softly, not taking her eyes off the officers, "hold on to your brother. Don't move." The boys pressed into each other, eyes wide, their world shrinking to the sight of their mother standing between them and two armed men in uniforms. Naomi's hand inched toward the zipper of her bag, and that was when everything changed. In a flash of impatience or anger, or worse, a bitter instinct he would later insist was justified, Officer Ryan Cole stepped forward and grabbed her wrist. His fingers clamped down hard, iron tight around her bones, the pressure sharp enough to send pain shooting up her forearm. Around them, the crowd gasped. The sound of Micah's breath hitching sliced through Naomi's chest. Jalen whispered, "Mom," his voice thin with panic. It wasn't just the grip, it was what the grip meant. It was a hand closing around not just her wrist, but her freedom, her dignity, her right to stand in the sun with her sons without being treated like a criminal. Naomi had spent her entire career training her body to react faster than her fear, to move before panic could flood her mind, to measure threats not just in what they were, but in what they could become. That training surged through her now, roaring up from somewhere deep and primal. Her FBI instructor's voice echoed in her memory. "You are allowed to protect yourself. You are allowed to survive." For a split second, Naomi saw two timelines unfold in her mind. In one, she stayed passive. She let the pain in her wrist deepen, let the narrative cement around her as difficult, combative, or unstable. Once she dared to speak up, her sons would watch her shrink, would learn that Black survival meant permanent submission, would carry that lesson in their bodies for years. In the other, she drew a line. Not with a shouted threat, not with a reckless lunge, but with the controlled, precise refusal to accept violence disguised as procedure. Naomi felt her body choose. The crowd, the grass, the sunlight, the whispers, all blurred for a moment, narrowing to the harsh grip of Cole's hand on her wrist and the terrified silence of two boys behind her. Her voice, when it came, was no longer just the voice of a mother in a park. It carried something older, something forged in courtrooms and interrogation rooms and long nights reading reports of people who never got to tell their side. "Do not put your hands on me," she said. It wasn't loud. It wasn't screamed. It was something worse. For men who depended on intimidation, it was certain. Her sons watched, wide-eyed, as their mother began to change in front of them. The woman who had been dropping footballs and playing tag a few minutes ago now stood straighter, heavier in the air, as if some invisible armor had settled around her shoulders. To them, she was still mom. To the officers holding her, she was about to become something else entirely. What they didn't know, what the woman at the picnic table didn't know, what the whispering onlookers didn't yet understand, was that they had crossed a line. They thought they were tightening control around a narrative they'd written 1,000 times, but they had just put their hands on the wrong black mother. The breaking point. Officer Cole's grip tightened, an act so small in motion, yet so enormous in meaning, that it seemed to tilt the entire atmosphere of the park. It was the kind of moment every black parent fears. The shift from conversation to control, from suspicion to force, from dignity to danger. The crowd stilled. Birdsong stopped. Even the sunlight felt sharper, harsher, as if the day itself understood something sacred had been violated. Naomi felt the pain shoot up her arm, but it wasn't the physical sting that made her breath catch. It was the sight of her sons' faces. Micah froze completely, eyes wide and glassy. Jalen's lips parted, trembling, his fingers clutching his sketchbook so tightly the pages wrinkled. The innocence of moments earlier, ice cream, football, laughter, had evaporated. What replaced it was fear, familiar fear, inherited fear, fear every black child learns too early. Something in Naomi's chest cracked, something old, something tired, something fed up with asking for room to breathe. Years of training surged through her muscles with an authority that no badge could give, an instinct sharpened not only by the FBI Academy, but by surviving America as a black woman. She centered her weight, dropped her shoulders, and twisted. In one precise, practiced motion, Naomi rotated her wrist outward, breaking Cole's grip cleanly. It was not aggressive, it was not wild, it was controlled, mechanical even, an action drilled into her bones through thousands of hours of defensive training. The move left Cole stumbling back a half step. Gasps broke across the crowd. Jalen whispered, "Mom," not in fear, but in awe. Naomi stepped forward, placing both boys behind her with one sweeping protective movement of her arm. Her voice changed. It deepened. It steadied. It carried a quiet authority that could freeze a moving river. "Do not put your hands on me," she said. This was not the voice she used at home. This wasn't the warmth in her morning reminders. This wasn't the tired humor after long workdays. This wasn't the soft reassurance she used to comfort Micah when nightmares found him. This was the voice of a black woman who refused to be diminished. This was the voice of a federal agent demanding respect for her humanity. This was the voice her supervisors listened to, the voice that criminals feared, the voice that did not tremble, even with two young boys watching. Officer Cole jolted backward, startled by the sudden shift in her stance. The grounding of her feet, the angle of her shoulders, the readiness of her hands. It was the body language of someone trained not only to deflect violence, but to end it. His partner, Officer Duggan, reached instinctively for his radio. Naomi's gaze snapped toward him like a blade. "Before you make that call," she said sharply, "you should know exactly who you're dealing with." Her words didn't rise in volume. They rose in impact. The crowd collectively leaned in, sensing the tectonic shift. "I am Special Agent Dr. Naomi Brooks with the Federal Bureau of Investigation," she continued, "and the two of you have made multiple procedural violations in the last 5 minutes alone." Whispers rippled outward like a wave. "FBI? Oh my God, did she say FBI? They messed with the wrong family." The white woman who had made the call rose to her feet at her picnic table, her posture stiff, her face blanching as if her actions were unraveling in front of her. Officer Dugan's radio froze halfway to his mouth. Cole's eyes widened. Their facade of casual authority cracked. But ego, especially bruised ego, has a way of drowning reason. Cole lunged at her, and Duggan followed. It happened in an instant. Two trained officers rushing forward, adrenaline drowning judgment, pride blinding protocol. But Naomi had already calculated it. Time slowed. Her breath steadied. Her vision tunneled. Her body moved with clarity born from experience, discipline, and necessity. Officer Cole reached for his taser, fingers brushing the grip. Naomi pivoted. In a single fluid motion, she sidestepped, caught his wrist, and redirected his momentum. Cole stumbled forward, losing balance, his taser slipping from his grip and falling uselessly to the grass. Using his forward motion, Naomi twisted his arm behind his back, locking his elbow at a precise angle. He cried out, stumbling. "Stay back, boys," she commanded, her voice slicing through the rising chaos. They obeyed instantly, because even terrified, they trusted her completely. Dugan charged, leading with brute force instead of technique. Naomi released Cole with a shove and dropped low, sweeping her leg across Dugan's shins. He toppled violently, hitting the ground so hard the air punched out of his lungs. A ring of spectators formed around them, phones raised high, recording everything. Some shouted in shock, others in support. "That's right. Don't let them touch those kids. Get them, sis." Naomi didn't revel in any of it. She didn't celebrate. She didn't gloat. Her face remained carved from focus and necessity. Because this wasn't a fight she wanted. This wasn't a fight she chose. This was a fight forced upon her. Forced upon too many black families across generations. Cole scrambled to his feet again, fury blotching his cheeks crimson. He reached for his gun, not drawing it, but touching it, and Naomi moved faster than fear. She stepped into him, drove her elbow deep into his solar plexus, and ripped the air from his lungs. He folded. She grabbed his arm and executed a perfect hip throw, flipping him cleanly onto the ground. His back hit the grass with a thud that earned a collective gasp. Dugan regained his footing, baton in hand. He swung, a wide, desperate arc. Naomi raised her forearm, absorbing the blow correctly, muscle over bone, then trapped his baton, twisted, and stripped it from his hand. She tossed it aside, far from him, farther from her sons. "Stand down," she commanded him, her tone no longer merely authoritative. It was absolute, a tone carved from resilience, from survival, from every black ancestor who had ever whispered, "You must stand, even when they try to break you." But Dugan swung again, wild with panic. Naomi ducked, delivered a sharp jab to his throat, precise enough to incapacitate, controlled enough not to injure. He gagged, stumbling backward. She swept his back knee. He dropped. Cole lurched upright one more time, fueled by outrage, embarrassment, and disbelief that a black mother, smaller, lighter, unarmed, had dismantled him so effortlessly. Naomi met him head-on. He threw a haymaker, sloppy, emotional. She stepped inside it, blocked, and delivered 3 rapid strikes to his ribs. Each one calibrated, each one decisive. He gasped, knees buckling. She seized his arm, pivoted, and executed a clean armbar takedown, pinning him hard onto the ground. Dugan tried to rise, but Naomi's foot pressed firmly between his shoulder blades, holding him safely immobilized. Both officers were down. Both were disarmed. Neither had the strength nor the leverage to rise. The crowd erupted. Cheers, shouts, disbelief, righteous anger at what they had witnessed. But Naomi didn't look at them. She looked only at her sons. "Micah, Jalen." Her voice softened, trembling at the edges with a tenderness that battle could not burn away. "Are you both okay?" "Yes, Mom," they answered in unison, relief and awe mixing in their voices. Micah bounced on his toes. "You were amazing." But Naomi wasn't proud, not even for a moment, because no mother should ever have to become a weapon to keep her children safe in a public park on a peaceful afternoon. Sirens wailed in the distance, multiple units approaching fast. The situation was escalating beyond her control. She needed to protect the truth now as fiercely as she had protected her children. Naomi straightened slowly, releasing the officers one at a time but never turning her back on them. She raised her voice so everyone could hear. "Everyone, please keep recording. Do not stop. Whatever happens next, make sure you capture every second." Her sons watched her, chests rising and falling rapidly, eyes fixed on her with a new understanding. They had always known their mother was strong, but now they understood something deeper, something heavier, the cost of that strength. Backup officers poured out of the arriving vehicles, weapons drawn, shouting orders over each other. Hands up! Step away from them! Don't move! Naomi didn't flinch. She lifted her chin, held her hands slightly out to her sides, obedient but unbroken. My credentials are in my back pocket, she said clearly. I am reaching for them slowly. She moved exactly as she said, slow, deliberate, impossible to misinterpret. She withdrew her badge and held it high, letting the gilded federal seal catch the sunlight like a beacon. I am Special Agent Dr. Naomi Brooks, she declared, her voice steady enough to calm a riot. And these officers have assaulted a federal agent, threatened my children, and violated multiple laws in front of dozens of witnesses. Gasps, murmurs, the shifting of 100 eyes as the truth landed hard and undeniable. Cole's face drained of color as he realized the scale of his mistake. Phones zoomed in, cameras flashed, people whispered, "That's why she moved like that. She's FBI." They really messed up. The park grew eerily quiet, the anticipation thick and electric. Naomi stood in the center of it, more than a mother, more than an agent, a protector, a survivor, a woman who refused to bow. And though her body trembled with adrenaline and fear for what might come next, her voice did not waver. Her son stood tall behind her, fear melting into pride. The truth was out now, and the system that tried to shrink her was about to learn just how powerful a black mother could be when she fought not out of anger, but out of love. The system closes in for a moment, just a breath. The park felt suspended between two worlds. On one side stood Naomi Brooks, steady and unshaken, her FBI badge catching the sunlight like a shield. Behind her, her son stood tall, their small hands still trembling, but their chins lifted with pride. On the other side, officers from the second wave of responding units hesitated, unsure, caught between the truth reflected in a dozen raised phones and the instinct to defend their own. The silence felt heavy enough to crush bone. Then the older sergeant stepped forward. He had gray threaded through his temples and lines etched across his forehead, lines carved by years of seeing too much, doing too little, and surviving in a culture where silence often preserved careers better than integrity. His voice carried a reluctant respect. "Ma'am," he said, "we'll need to verify that badge." Naomi nodded. "Of course. Contact the local FBI field office. They'll confirm everything." It was a simple exchange on the surface, but beneath it, something profound shifted. The officers weren't in control anymore. Not fully, not cleanly, and that unsettled them more than any takedown ever could. The sergeant examined her credentials, his expression neutral but watchful. Naomi could almost see him calculating. If she's lying, she's committed a felony. If she's telling the truth, we're standing in the middle of a disaster. She sensed the moment he realized it was the second one. He handed her badge back with a small nod before stepping aside to radio dispatch. But the fragile stillness did not last. Officer Cole, crumpled in disgrace a few feet away, struggled to his feet, fury twisting his features. Duggan hovered beside him, face still flushed from humiliation. The crowd murmured louder. Phones remained lifted, recording everything. Cole's voice sliced through the air like a jagged blade. "She attacked us," he shouted, pointing at Naomi with a trembling hand. "Badge or no badge, she assaulted police officers." Duggan nodded aggressively. "She was acting unstable from the start, erratic, uncooperative. We tried to talk to her, and she became violent." A ripple of disbelief moved through the onlookers. "That's a lie," a teenager shouted from the crowd. "Everything's on video," another person added, but Naomi gently squeezed her son's shoulders to keep them calm. "Let them talk," she whispered, so only they could hear. "Every word they say digs the hole deeper." Cole's voice cracked as he raised it even higher. "How do we know that badge is even real? FBI agents don't just show up at parks starting fights." Naomi's gaze locked on his, cold, unflinching, tired of the same old script. "I was here with my children," she said. "You initiated physical contact. You escalated everything. Multiple videos show exactly what happened." But she could already sense something shifting behind the officers, an energy forming, a tightening in the ranks. The backup officers exchanged glances, subtle, quick, heavy, despite the footage, despite the witnesses, Despite the badge, they were choosing a side, and it wasn't hers. Just then, a black SUV with police markings pulled into the lot. The atmosphere tightened, wound taut as a rope stretched too far. The vehicle door slammed, and Captain Richard Harlan stepped out. Naomi's stomach clenched. She recognized him from interagency meetings, a man with a reputation built on loyalty to his department and a history of burying problem cases with bureaucratic precision. A man known for protecting officers first, truth second, and black lives not at all. Harlan surveyed the scene with cold eyes. He barely glanced at Naomi's badge. Instead, he approached Cole and Dugan first, his posture paternal, protective. "Officers," he said, his voice dripping with false concern. "Are you injured?" Naomi felt something inside her freeze. This wasn't about fact-finding. This wasn't about justice. This was about narrative, and she knew exactly which version he intended to cement. Cole spoke quickly, almost breathlessly, clinging to the lifeline. "She attacked us, Captain. We responded to a suspicious person call, and she became aggressive." Dugan nodded vigorously. "We tried to do a routine check. She escalated, completely unprovoked." The crowd erupted in protest. "That's not true. She was defending herself. We saw everything." But Harlan raised a hand, silencing them without so much as a glance. His eyes locked onto Naomi like she was an inconvenience, a threat, an obstacle to maintaining departmental order. "Agent Brooks," he said, emphasizing the title with thinly veiled skepticism, "if that is who you really are, we will need to investigate this thoroughly. Assaulting officers is a serious offense." Naomi stepped forward, her chin lifted. "Captain Harlan," she replied, "your officers harassed my children and me without cause. They escalated, used force, and threatened us. Everything is on video, and I have every right to be here." Harlan's expression hardened, though he forced a condescending smile. "Videos can be misleading," he said smoothly. "They don't capture what happened before. We will need statements from everyone. And of course, we'll have to verify your credentials through official channels." Naomi could hear the subtext clearly. "We're going to twist this however we need to." But what chilled her most wasn't his words. It was watching the backup officers subtly shift their stances, aligning with him. They straightened, shoulders squared, eyes narrowed. Truth, witnesses, badge, none of it mattered. The system had chosen its loyalty, and it wasn't to justice. A cold shiver slid down Naomi's spine. Not of fear, but of recognition. She had seen this before. In corrupt agencies, in buried inquiries, in systems that swallowed accountability whole. This wasn't about her. This wasn't about two officers. This was about protecting an institution that had never protected families like hers. Her brief moment of moral clarity in the park, the exposure, the truth, the people rallying, began to shrink beneath the weight of institutional force. "Mom," Jalen's voice was quiet, small, cracked. "Are we in trouble?" She pulled both her sons closer, anchoring herself in the warmth of their bodies. "No, baby," she whispered. "We haven't done anything wrong. But," she swallowed hard, "but this is going to be a longer fight than we thought." Over Harlan's shoulder, she saw Cole and Duggan whispering urgently, gesturing at her and at the crowd, constructing their lies in real time. Harlan watched her from a distance, speaking into his radio, his posture rigid with calculation, his eyes locked onto hers with something colder than anger. This wasn't retaliation. This was a strategy, and that was more dangerous than any baton, taser, or firearm pointed her way. The moment she had taken control, defended her children, and revealed her identity, she had become more than a threat. She had become a symbol, and symbols are harder to silence. As Harlan finished his radio call and turned back toward her, Naomi felt the familiar ache behind her ribs. The ache of knowing the truth didn't always win. Not quickly, not cleanly, not without sacrifice. The life she had built, her career, her reputation, the stability she worked so hard to give her sons, was suddenly at risk. Not because she had done anything wrong, but because she had dared to stand firm against the wrong done to her. Her sons watched her intently, fear flickering in their eyes. She knelt between them, pulling them close enough to feel their hearts hammering against her. "You're safe," she whispered. "I'm here. And whatever happens next," she touched her forehead gently to theirs, "is we face it together." Sonarinamernom. But as she rose, watching Harlan approach, surrounded by officers who had already chosen their story, Naomi understood something with a clarity that chilled her. The real battle had only just begun. The night fear moved into their home. The drive home should have been quiet, should have been a return to safety, to stability, to the familiar warmth of their small suburban house. But instead, every turn felt heavy, every shadow elongated, every passing patrol car loud enough to shake the air inside the SUV. Naomi's hands remained steady on the steering wheel, but only because she forced them to be. Her knuckles whitened against the leather. Her breath stayed shallow, controlled, measured. She had faced down armed criminals, hostile suspects, and corrupt officials before. But nothing rattled her like the thought of her sons being traumatized on her watch. In the rearview mirror, Jalen stared out the window, his sketchbook limp in his lap. Micah hugged himself, small shoulders trembling under the seatbelt. "Mom," Jalen asked suddenly, his voice cracking, "are they going to arrest you?" Naomi swallowed. "No, sweetheart." "But Captain Harlan, he looked angry," Jalen whispered. "Really angry." "I know," she admitted, "but I didn't do anything wrong. And everything is on video. Remember that." Micah's voice quivered. "But what if they lie? What if they make stuff up and they come to our house at night?" Something inside Naomi twisted, sharp and cruel, at the thought of her youngest lying awake in fear of the police. Children shouldn't know this kind of fear. They shouldn't look at patrol cars and see danger. They shouldn't have to ask their mother whether the people sworn to protect them might hurt her or them. She forced her voice to be calm. "Then we fight back with the truth," she said, echoing the same line that had anchored her countless times in her career. "I'm an FBI agent. I know how to handle this." But in her stomach, something cold churned. Truth didn't always win, not against a department determined to bury their mistakes. When they pulled into their driveway, the sunset painted everything in long, bruised shadows. She scanned the street automatically, checking windows, doorways, parked cars, a habit from work, a necessity for survival. But tonight, the fear wasn't abstract. Tonight, danger felt close. Inside, the house felt unfamiliar, like a place that no longer offered shelter. She ushered the boys in, locking the door behind them with a quiet click that held more meaning than she wished it did. "Go get ready for bed," she said softly. "It's been a very long day." As they trudged upstairs, Naomi did a sweep of the house, checking doors, peering through curtains, testing window latches, scanning the front yard for unmarked vehicles. Her training told her to stay vigilant. Her instincts screamed to stay paranoid. When she passed the bathroom, she overheard Jalen whispering, "Micah, don't worry. Mom won't let them hurt us." "I know," Micah whispered back. "But what if the mean cops come here? What if they try?" Naomi closed her eyes, her heart shattering piece by piece. This, this right here, was the cost of racism America rarely acknowledged. Not the headlines, not the body cam footage, not the legal battles, but the way it carved fear into children's bones, the way it rewrote their innocence, the way it made their own home feel unsafe. She tucked them into bed one at a time. Jalen's room was filled with sketches, superheroes, landscapes, characters he'd imagined. His newest drawing, resting on his nightstand, made her breath hitch. It was her, standing in front of him and Micah, arms outstretched, body angled like a shield. "You're our superhero," he whispered when she asked about it. "And superheroes always win." She brushed his curls gently. "I'm proud of you, baby. Get some sleep." In Micah's room, he clutched his worn stuffed elephant, eyes wide and scared. "Will you stay with me a while?" he asked. She sat on the edge of his bed and smoothed his hair. "Of course." "I was scared when that officer grabbed you," he whispered. I thought they were going to take you away." Her throat tightened. "I was scared too," she admitted softly. "But sometimes being brave means doing the right thing, even when you're afraid." He held her tighter. "I love you, Mom. I love you more than anything," she whispered back. When his breathing finally grew steady, she stood quietly and headed downstairs. The silence of the house felt suffocating. She needed answers. She needed clarity. She needed to prepare. Her phone buzzed. Sarah Martinez, her colleague at the FBI. The moment Naomi answered, she sensed danger in Sarah's trembling whisper. Naomi, are you somewhere private? Yeah, she said. Talk to me. I've been checking channels, Sarah said. Calling in favors. Asking around quietly. She paused. Naomi, they're not just angry. They're mobilizing. Naomi froze. What does that mean? It means, Sarah said, voice breaking, they're coming after you. Hard. They want you buried. Naomi closed her eyes, leaning a hand against the kitchen counter for support. She'd known the retaliation would come. She hadn't expected it to come this fast. What exactly are they planning? She asked. But Sarah hesitated. Naomi, whatever you do, don't be alone with any local officers. Don't go anywhere without witnesses. And be prepared for a storm. The call ended, leaving Naomi standing in the dim kitchen, the weight of the truth pressing into her chest. She opened her laptop and began documenting everything with clinical precision. The officers' words, their positions, their tactics, the crowd's reactions, the timestamps. She wrote with the sharpness of someone who had learned that details, truth, could be both a weapon and a shield. Her phone buzzed again. This time, the caller ID made her straighten reflexively. Angela Washington, the civil rights attorney who had dismantled more corrupt departments than anyone Naomi knew. I saw the videos, Angela said. All of them. 6 different angles. Naomi, this is a clear civil rights violation. A massive one. We need to meet, Naomi replied. Tomorrow, 9 a.m., and bring everything. We're going to build an airtight case. When the call ended, Naomi allowed herself a breath, a tiny thread of hope in a sea of fear. But it dissolved instantly when she opened her social media. The videos had exploded overnight. Tens of thousands of views, hundreds of comments, a growing wave of outrage, but also a swarm of hate. People are calling her unstable, dangerous, aggressive, a threat. Racism drips through the screen like poison. Still, Naomi typed her truth. She wrote a measured, unembellished account of the park incident. She stated her name, her title, and her role as a mother. She ended with a call for accountability, and the internet ignited. Justice for Naomi began to trend. Support poured in from other Black mothers, from activists, from survivors, from strangers who had lived the same story in different parks on different afternoons. The next morning, Jalen stumbled into the kitchen. Mom, he said, eyes wide, you're on TV. The headline read, Hero or Threat? FBI agents park confrontation sparks national debate. Naomi exhaled slowly, brushing a curl from her son's forehead. Baby, what matters is that we know the truth. Throughout the morning, pressure built like a rising tide. Journalists emailed, activists called, parents from the boys' school sent worried messages. And at noon, Chief of Police Richard Harlan stepped to a podium framed by flags and microphones. We take allegations seriously, he said, feigning concern, but our officers face split-second decisions in dangerous situations. Naomi muted the TV. She knew what he was doing. He was rewriting the story. And somewhere inside her, sorrow gave way to resolve. When she later picked her sons up from school, her eyes scanned for unmarked cars. Her instincts sharpened. Her spine straightened. Her boys watched her closely, sensing the shift. Mom, Jalen whispered, are they following us? Naomi checked the mirror. A dark sedan was 2 cars back, matching every turn. Unmarked. Police issue. She smiled gently. Just people going the same direction. But when she turned for no reason, and the sedan followed, her stomach sank. At home, another unmarked car waited across the street. Micah shivered. Mom, is that them? Naomi positioned herself between her boys and the window. Yes, she thought. No, she said aloud. Let's get inside. Inside, she watched the detectives watching her. She stroked her son's head as they bent over their homework, pretending everything was normal, pretending she wasn't calculating evacuation routes and danger levels, and the timing of retaliation. The fight had begun, and the system was preparing to silence her. But Naomi was preparing too, for truth, for justice, for every mother who had ever stood between her children and a world determined to break them. Tonight, fear moved into their home, but so did resolve. The night before the forum, Olivia Harris stood in the dimly lit hallway outside her son's bedrooms, the house unusually still, the weight of the coming night pressing against her chest. The community forum, now national news, was less than 24 hours away. The evidence she carried had the power to expose an entire network of corruption, but it also placed her directly in the crosshairs of the very people who had tried to destroy her. She steadied her breathing, listening to the soft hum of the air conditioner, the faint murmur of traffic outside, and the uneven rhythm of her own heartbeat. Her ribs still ached from the assault 3 nights earlier, but pain had become a familiar companion, one she refused to allow to silence her. Downstairs, the dining room had transformed into a command center. Files were stacked in careful order, color-coded tabs marking incidents, payoffs, witness statements, falsified reports, and a timeline stretching back nearly 2 decades. Angela Brooks, her civil rights attorney, had a laptop open and a binder spread across her lap. Marcus Reed, a community organizer who had spent years fighting the department's abuses, paced near the window. An investigative journalist, Hannah Kim, sat typing rapidly, cross-checking every piece of evidence Olivia planned to present. The air buzzed with purpose, strategy, and a tension almost electric in its intensity. Olivia walked down the stairs, gripping the railing when another sharp pulse of pain shot through her ribs. Marcus noticed immediately. "You need to rest," he said gently, stopping his pacing. "Tomorrow's going to be a war." "I'll rest when this is over," Olivia replied, forcing a small smile. "Right now, there's too much to prepare." Angela looked up. "We've gone through the first half of the documentation again. Everything checks out. The patterns of misconduct are undeniable. The financial transfers alone will bury half the union leadership. And the testimonies," Hannah added, sliding her glasses up her nose, "are airtight. Once the public hears what happened to those families, the department won't be able to hide behind press releases or doctored statements." Olivia exhaled slowly. "Good, because we're not just taking down a few officers. We're exposing an entire system built on fear and silence." Silence settled briefly over the room, heavy and reflective. The enormity of what they were doing was never far from any of their minds. For years, complaints had vanished, victims had been discredited, body cam footage had mysteriously gone missing, and internal affairs investigations had ended before they began. The city had lived under a shadow disguised as law and order. Now finally the truth was gathering force, ready to burst through the cracks that had been widening for years. "You ready to rehearse?" Angela asked, flipping to the next tab in her binder. Olivia nodded. "Start from the beginning." Angela read aloud the first line of Olivia's statement, her voice clear and steady. "The officers approached without cause. They escalated, threatened, and ultimately endangered the lives of my sons." Olivia closed her eyes and pictured that afternoon in the park. Ethan's sketchbook slipped from his hands. Miles's small fingers are gripping her shirt, the cold, rehearsed authority in the officers' voices. And afterward, the masked men rushing her driveway, the suspension letter, the fabricated headlines branding her unstable. "I remember every detail," Olivia whispered, "not because I want to, but because my boys still dream about it every night." Marcus stopped pacing. "That's why tomorrow matters. You're not just speaking for yourself. You're speaking for every black parent who's ever had to explain why the world treats them differently. For every child who learned too young what fear looks like." Hannah nodded. "And you're speaking for the people whose voices were erased, those who didn't have cameras or a platform or federal training to defend themselves." Olivia felt emotion rise in her throat. "I just want my boys to grow up believing this country can be better than what it showed them." "It can be," Angela said softly, "but only if people like you stand up and say, 'Enough.'" The team returned to work. They rehearsed the sequence in which Olivia would present her documents. They refined her statements so they were precise, powerful, and impossible to twist. They organized evidence into digital backups, hard drives, encrypted folders, printed binders, and cloud files. Marcus coordinated the community turnout, ensuring trusted volunteers would be stationed near exits, holding cameras, documenting everything. Hannah prepared a real-time media release to drop as soon as Olivia finished speaking, making it impossible for police leadership to bury the information. Hours passed. The living room clock ticked out its steady rhythm. The house, filled with determination, felt less like a battlefield and more like a place where history was quietly sharpening its blade. Shortly after 10, soft footsteps padded down the hallway. Olivia's sons stood at the edge of the dining room wearing their pajamas, their faces drowsy but anxious. Ethan held his sketchbook protectively to his chest. Miles clutched his favorite stuffed dinosaur by the neck. "Mom?" Ethan asked hesitantly. "Are you still working?" Olivia's expression softened. "I thought you two were asleep." "We couldn't," Miles admitted, his voice small. "We heard talking." Angela and Marcus exchanged gentle, sympathetic looks as Olivia knelt, wincing, to be at eye level with her boys. "Come here," she said, opening her arms. Both boys rushed into her embrace, careful of her bruised ribs but holding her with fierce determination. Their innocence tugged painfully at her heart. "You're worried about tomorrow," Olivia murmured, brushing Ethan's curls back from his forehead. Ethan nodded. "They'll be there, won't they? The officers you exposed?" "Yes," Olivia answered honestly. "But I'll have lots of people there supporting me, and cameras, in our community. And you know what else?" She tapped Ethan's chest gently. "The truth." Miles burrowed closer. "What if they try to hurt you again?" Olivia swallowed hard. Her sons deserved reassurance, not fear. "Listen to me," she said, her voice low and steady. "What happened before won't happen tomorrow. We'll be surrounded by people who came to protect the truth. The world is watching now, and I won't be alone." Ethan looked down at his sketchbook. "I made something for you," he whispered. "For tomorrow." He opened to a new drawing. It showed Olivia standing in front of a crowd, her posture straight, her expression determined. Behind her, Ethan had drawn dozens of small figures representing the community, and in front of her, he had drawn Miles and himself, their hands clasped, standing courageously behind their mother like a living shield of belief. Tears stung Olivia's eyes. "Baby," she whispered, "this is beautiful." "It's for luck," Ethan said, "and to remind you who you're fighting for." Olivia pulled both boys close again. "Thank you. I'll carry it with me everywhere I go tomorrow." Angela smiled. Marcus wiped his eyes discreetly. Hannah reached for another tissue, pretending to adjust her glasses. "You two should try to sleep," Olivia said softly. "Tomorrow will be a long day for all of us." "Will the truth win?" Miles asked softly. Olivia touched his cheek. "It always wins. It just needs people brave enough to speak it." The boys nodded. Olivia watched them walk back upstairs, their small hands intertwined, their silhouettes glowing faintly in the soft hall light. When they disappeared into their rooms, Olivia exhaled a long, trembling breath. Angela whispered, "They're incredible." "They're my reason," Olivia replied. The night stretched on. Olivia reviewed evidence again, line by line, signature by signature, determined to leave no room for doubt. She practiced her statement in the mirror, adjusting her tone, her pacing, her posture. She prepared backup drives, triple-checking encryption passwords. Marcus set up secure messaging channels. Hannah arranged for live-stream broadcasts. Angela finalized legal documents that would be filed immediately following the forum. By the time midnight passed, exhaustion tugged at Olivia's body, but determination kept her upright. She thought of the families whose pain lined her table in the form of forgotten reports and silenced testimonies. She thought of mothers who had buried sons, sons who had lost fathers, fathers who had been treated like suspects instead of citizens. She thought of every moment when America told someone who looked like her that their dignity was negotiable. Her jaw tightened. Not tonight, not tomorrow, not anymore. Finally, when preparations were complete and every plan had been rehearsed, Olivia stood before the evidence-covered dining table and placed her hands upon its surface. She closed her eyes and whispered a promise. Not to her team, not to the cameras waiting, not even to the city that had betrayed her, but to her boys asleep upstairs. "They will never grow up afraid, not while I still have breath." Outside, distant sirens wailed through the city, but this time the sound didn't make her flinch. She felt something steadier rising within her. Resolve. purpose, and the unwavering belief that tomorrow the truth would finally step into the light. Form erupts. The community center buzzed with a strange electricity, a tension that seemed to vibrate beneath the floorboards. Rows of metal chairs filled the auditorium, every seat taken and every remaining inch of space crowded with standing spectators. Local residents, activists, teachers, elders, and teenagers, people from every corner of the city, had come together for a single purpose. They were tired, they were awake, and they were ready to hear the truth that had lived in whispers for far too long. Television cameras lined the back wall, their red recording lights blinking like watchful eyes. News anchors murmured rapid-fire commentary. Photographers jockeyed for position. On the stage sat city council members, community leaders, and representatives from the police department, including the union president, Daniel Mercer, his jaw set stone hard. Near the front row, Olivia Harris stood waiting, a folder of evidence in her hands. She felt the weight of every page, every signature, every grieving voice whose story had been dismissed. Her body still ached from the assault days earlier, but the bruises only strengthened her resolve. If the department had hoped to intimidate her, they had miscalculated. Pain had sharpened her, not broken her. Her sons waited with their grandmother 2 blocks away, watching the live stream from the safety of a neighbor's home. Ethan's drawing, her standing tall before a crowd, was tucked inside Olivia's folder, the edges peeking out like a promise she refused to betray. A hush rippled through the room as Mercer approached the podium. He adjusted the microphone, cleared his throat, and donned a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Thank you all for being here," he began, voice rolling with practiced confidence. "We understand there has been recent concern regarding an incident involving our officers. But let's be clear, social media hysteria does not replace factual investigation." A low murmur spread through the crowd. Mercer continued, "Our officers acted appropriately when confronted by an individual who, based on witness descriptions, appeared unstable and aggressive. The narrative circulating online is misleading at best, slanderous at worst." Olivia felt her jaw tighten. "And," Mercer added, "this forum is not a trial. It is an opportunity for us to correct misinformation and reassure the community that our officers—" "That's a lie." The words cut through the auditorium like a blade. Every head turned. Olivia Harris stepped forward, her voice steady, her posture unwavering. "Everything you're saying is a lie." Gasps rippled across the room. Cameras whipped toward her. Mercer stiffened, annoyance flashing across his face. "Ms. Harris," he said, voice tight, "you will have your turn to speak." "No," Olivia said, raising the folder. "My turn is now." Her voice rang out, calm, clear, commanding. She stepped into the aisle, hundreds of eyes following her. Her heart pounded, but not from fear, from purpose, from truth pressing to be released. "I tried to stay silent at first," Olivia said, projecting her voice so it filled the space. "I tried to believe the system I worked for would correct itself. But I was wrong, because silence doesn't heal corruption. Silence feeds it." Applause broke out from scattered corners of the room. Olivia continued walking toward the stage. "3 nights ago, masked men attacked me outside my own home. They vanished when police arrived, and within minutes I was suspended from duty and painted unstable by the very department whose misconduct I reported." People gasped. Others whispered in outrage. "And that is only the beginning of what they've done." She climbed the steps to the stage. "Security!" Mercer barked. "Remove this woman at once." 2 officers in the aisle hesitated, hands hovering near their belts. But the crowd rose as one. "No!" someone shouted. "Let her speak! She's telling the truth." Phones shot upward like a forest of raised fists, every lens aimed at the stage. Mercer paled. Olivia laid her folder on the podium, and with a calmness that seemed almost holy, she began pulling out documents. "Let's talk about the facts," she said. "The ones you've been bearing." She held up the first file. March 12th, a 16-year-old boy stopped for matching a description. He left the encounter with a broken wrist. The complaint disappeared, the audience murmured. April 7th, an elderly black couple was threatened during a routine stop. Their report, missing. She lifted another document. June 2nd. A woman called the police for help during a domestic dispute. Instead of protection, she received intimidation. The union paid her $10,000 to stay quiet. Olivia placed multiple pages across the podium. Bank records, signatures, memos, complaint logs. All of it documented, all of it covered up. Mercer lunged forward to grab the papers, but Olivia stepped sideways, smooth and controlled. Her FBI training unmistakable. The audience erupted with shouts. "Let her speak! Stop trying to silence her! This is our community!" Cameras surged closer. Microphones extended. The room vibrated with a collective force, the sound of a community reclaiming its voice. Mercer pointed sharply. "Enough! Get her off this stage!" But before the officers could reach her, a sudden crash erupted at the back of the room. The doors burst open. 3 officers in tactical gear stormed forward, the same broad-shouldered figures who had ambushed Olivia in her driveway. Their boots thundered against the floor as they pushed past chairs, shoving people aside. Screams echoed. Phones zoomed in, and Olivia, seeing them advance, felt something in her chest sharpen into steel. Not again. The first officer lunged for her arm. Olivia caught his wrist, pivoted, and sent him tumbling across the edge of the stage. The crowd gasped, then roared. The second officer swung a baton. She blocked with her forearm, twisted, and disarmed him. The baton clattered to the floor. A cheer erupted. The third officer, bigger than the others, wrapped his arms around her from behind. But Olivia dropped her weight, breaking his grip. She drove her elbow into his ribs, spun, and swept his legs. He crashed to the floor. The room exploded. Screams, cheers, disbelief, outrage. "Keep filming," someone shouted. "Don't stop." The officers, groaning, struggled to rise. Olivia planted her feet on stage, shoulders squared, breath heavy but steady. "This," she declared, her voice booming, "is what they do when they're afraid of the truth." The room fell silent, the enormity of her words vibrating in the air. "They use force to silence voices," she continued. "They use lies to bury evidence. They use fear to control a community that they were sworn to protect." Her eyes swept across the crowd, across mothers clutching their children, elders leaning forward with hope, students recording every moment. "But today," Olivia said, lifting Ethan's drawing from her folder, "I'm not afraid." A single tear slid down her cheek. "My sons deserve better than a world where their mother must fight armed officers to prove she belongs in a park. Your sons deserve better. Your daughters deserve better. Every child deserves better." Applause began softly, one person clapping slowly, reverently, then another, then dozens, then hundreds, until the entire auditorium thundered with applause, so powerful it shook the air. Olivia raised her voice above the roar. "Racism is not an accident. Corruption is not an accident. Injustice is not an accident. But neither is change. Change is a choice, a united choice." The applause swelled again. "Tonight," Olivia continued, "we choose truth. We choose community. We choose justice. And we choose to love our neighbors enough to fight for the world they deserve." Emotion broke across the room like a wave, crying, shouting, cheering, standing. Olivia laid the documents across the podium, each page a stake driven into the heart of corruption. "Everything the department tried to bury," she said, "is here, and tonight the whole country will see it." Reporters flooded the stage. Pastor Lawrence, watching from the front row, gave her a proud nod. Angela and Marcus appeared at her sides, gathering documents, sealing them into evidence bags and preparing to file them immediately. The officers Olivia had disarmed groaned on the ground, clutching bruises, their desperation exposed before the world. Mercer disappeared into the crowd, his face pale, his power crumbling. Olivia looked out at the sea of people, strangers who had become witnesses, allies, protectors. Their faces glowed with fierce belief, and for the first time since the day in the park, when her boy's innocence was nearly stolen, hope rose inside her like a sunrise. Hope for Ethan, hope for Miles, hope for every child who deserved a country that saw their value before their skin. Olivia stepped back from the podium, lifting Ethan's drawing to her heart. "We are building a stronger America," she said softly, powerfully. "Together. A chant swelled, starting in the back, rolling forward like thunder. Olivia! 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 She closed her eyes, letting the sound wash over her. Not because she needed praise, but because the truth had finally been heard. And once heard, it could never be silenced again. A new beginning. The morning after the explosive community forum, the city woke to a different world. The sun had barely risen when news anchors across the country began replaying clips of Olivia Harris standing defiantly on stage, her voice echoing through the auditorium as she exposed corruption that had thrived in silence for decades. Footage of her disarming the officers in tactical gear flooded every channel, played again and again until her strength, her precision, and her unwavering resolve became the image of a city's reckoning. Inside her small kitchen, Olivia watched the coverage with her sons seated on either side of her. Ethan stared at the screen with wide eyes, still clutching the pencil he had carried since last night. Miles leaned into Olivia's side, his tiny hand wrapped around her arm, as if grounding himself to the sight of his mother, standing unbroken. A news anchor spoke with barely contained astonishment. What you're seeing is unprecedented. An FBI behavioral specialist, suspended only days ago, revealed a trove of evidence linking multiple officers to excessive force complaints and cover-ups. The Department of Justice has just announced an immediate federal probe into the city's union leadership and internal affairs division. Olivia exhaled, the sound closer to a sigh of release than exhaustion. She felt the tension in her ribs, the dull ache along her jaw, the bruises blooming beneath her shirt. But beneath all of that was a steadiness she hadn't felt in weeks, a sense of consequence, a sense that the weight she had carried alone was now being lifted by thousands of hands. Miles tugged at her sleeve. Mom, are the bad guys going to jail? Olivia hesitated, not because she didn't have hope, but because she wanted her sons to understand something deeper than revenge. She wanted them to understand justice. Some of them will, she answered softly. And more importantly, everyone can see what they did. The truth is out now, and the truth is stronger than any badge or title. Miles nodded slowly, absorbing her words as only a child learning the world could. Ethan leaned in closer, still watching the screen. You're on every channel, he whispered, equal parts proud and stunned. Everyone's talking about how brave you are. Olivia kissed his forehead. Bravery isn't about fighting, she said. It's about doing the right thing, even when you're scared. You both helped me remember that. Ethan smiled, small, warm, honest. The doorbell rang. Olivia stiffened. For days, her home had been ground zero for fear. Unmarked sedans idling outside, masked men stepping from the shadows, hostile reporters crowding her porch. But this ring held no menace, only a calm, expectant tone. She opened the door to find Pastor Lawrence, Angela Brooks, Marcus Reed, and Hannah Kim standing together, a unified front. Behind them, neighbors gathered along the sidewalk, candles still in their hands from last night's vigil. Morning, Olivia, Pastor Lawrence said with a gentle smile. We came to check on you. Angela held up a stack of printed newspapers. Thought you might want to see this. On the front page of each edition, local and national, was the same photo. Olivia on stage, her hand raised, surrounded by evidence and fallen officers, her expression fierce with truth. The headline read, Mother of Truth, Olivia Harris ignites national reform. Olivia swallowed hard, emotion rising, not because of the attention, but because the truth finally had a voice loud enough to shake the foundations that once tried to crush it. Marcus stepped forward. The chief resigned this morning, he said, and they just arrested 2 internal affairs investigators for obstruction of justice. Hannah added, federal agents are raiding the union headquarters. They found files in a locked basement room, dozens of them, cases buried for years. Olivia closed her eyes briefly, not in triumph, but in solemn recognition. So many lives had been touched by that darkness. So many families had been dismissed, ignored, forgotten. But now their stories were coming into the light. Pastor Lawrence placed a hand over his heart. You did this, he said gently. No, Olivia corrected him. We did this. All of us. Every person who recorded, who listened, who spoke up. It takes a community to uproot a system. Ethan and Miles peeked from behind their mother's legs. Pastor Lawrence bent down with a kind smile. Your mom is helping build a better America for you boys. Ethan grinned proudly. Miles nodded with childlike solemnity, then whispered, She's our superhero. Olivia felt her heart swell with fierce tenderness. But she also knew heroes didn't act alone. Heroes were made by moments, by choices, by the people who believed in them. Angela stepped inside. We need to prepare for the next step. The DOJ wants a formal statement, and several national civil rights organizations want you to speak at upcoming town halls. Olivia shook her head slowly. Right now, I just want to breathe, to let my boys feel safe again, to remember what peace feels like. You will, Angela said softly. But peace doesn't come from stepping back. It comes from finishing what you started. The phone on the counter buzzed repeatedly. Calls from journalists, messages from supporters, invitations from national platforms. Olivia silenced it gently. There's something I need to do first, she said. That afternoon, Olivia returned, hesitant yet determined, to the park where everything had begun. The trees shimmered in a gentle breeze. Children ran across the grass with reckless freedom. The fountain's water glinted in the sun, casting tiny rainbows in the air. It looked peaceful, normal, untouched by the violence that had almost shattered her family. Ethan and Miles ran toward their favorite picnic table, the one beside the fountain. Mom, look, Ethan called. It's free. The boys darted forward, excitement renewed, laughter lighter than she'd heard in weeks. Olivia walked behind them, her steps slower, but each footfall grounding her deeper into the earth. This place held so much pain, yet it also held the memory of her son's laughter before the world had tried to make them fear it. As she approached the table, she noticed something unusual. A small bouquet of fresh white lilies wrapped in plain craft paper, leaning against the bench. A note was tucked inside. With steady hands, she unfolded the paper. Thank you for standing up for all of us. A mother who was once afraid to come here. Olivia's breath caught. Tears pricked her eyes. Not of sorrow, but of recognition. She was not alone. Never had been. Not truly. Miles tugged her sleeve. Mom, can we play? She nodded. Go ahead, baby. Ethan grabbed the old football from the car, tossing it with renewed enthusiasm. Miles chased it across the grass, his laughter ringing like a small bell. Olivia watched them, the tension easing from her shoulders. For the first time in what felt like years, she saw her boys simply being children, carefree, joyful, unburdened. The world hadn't changed yet, but something had shifted. Something had begun. A mother sitting on a nearby bench approached cautiously. Ms. Harris? Olivia turned. Yes? The woman hesitated, eyes glistening with vulnerability. I wanted to say thank you for what you did, for what you're still doing. My son, he's only 9, and he's already been stopped twice while riding his bike. I didn't know what to tell him. I didn't know how to make him feel safe. Emotion tightened Olivia's throat. No mother should ever have to explain fear to a child, she said quietly. That's why we have to keep fighting. The woman nodded. I'd love for my son to play with your boys sometime, if you'd like. A simple invitation, a simple act of community. Olivia smiled. I'd like that. When the woman walked away, Olivia felt something inside her settle, a small but profound healing. Bit by bit, the narrative of fear was being rewritten. As the sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in warm oranges and purples, Ethan and Miles joined their mother on the bench. They were flushed from running, panting happily. Mom, Ethan said, scooting close, do you think things will change for real? Like, everywhere. Olivia looked out across the park. The children, the families, the neighborhoods slowly waking up to their own power. Yes, she said, but change doesn't happen all at once. It happens piece by piece, story by story, person by person. Miles lay his head on her shoulder. We'll help you, he whispered. Olivia kissed the top of his curls. I know you will. The boys leaned into her, their small bodies warm against her sides. For a moment, everything felt still, safe, whole. Then a familiar voice called from behind them. Olivia! She turned to see her FBI supervisor approaching, suit jacket unbuttoned, expression conflicted but sincere. Sir, Olivia said, rising. He held out a small leather badge case. Hers. The Bureau reinstated you this morning, he said. Full clearance, full honors, back pay, everything. Olivia stared at the badge. The weight of it, the history, the betrayal, the pride, the pain. Slowly, she closed the case. Thank you, she said, her voice even. But I can't come back. Her supervisor blinked. I don't understand. I didn't fight all this so I could return to business as usual. I fought for my sons, for every child who deserves to grow up unafraid. My place now is with the people, in the community, making sure this never happens again. Her supervisor's shoulders sagged, not in disappointment, but in respect. We'll miss you, he said. But I understand. She nodded. We all have a mission. Mine just changed. He left quietly, the badge still in her hand. Ethan looked up. You're not going back? No, sweetheart. Why? Because some fights are bigger than a job. My job lets me protect people one case at a time. But this, she gestured to the park, the families, the city awakening to justice. This lets me protect the world you're growing up in. Ethan's smile was slow and bright. That's even better. Olivia placed the badge in her bag, not as an identity, but as a reminder of who she had been, who she had become, and who she needed to be. The sun slipped beneath the horizon, leaving streaks of gold across the sky. The park lights flickered on, glowing softly like lanterns guiding the path ahead. Miles yawned. Mom, can we stay just a little longer? Olivia looked at her boys, safe, smiling, free. Yes, she whispered, just a little longer. They stood together near the fountain as fireflies began to dance in the dusk. Ethan caught one in his cupped hands, showing it to Miles, who watched with quiet awe. As they released the glowing creature into the night air, Olivia felt the truth settle deep within her heart. Her sons weren't just healing. They were reclaiming their childhood, and she was reclaiming her purpose. Tomorrow she would meet with community leaders. She would help draft new policies. She would organize training programs, workshops, and educational forums. She would fight, not for a badge, but for a generation. But tonight, she watched her sons chase fireflies, laughter ringing pure and unbroken. Tonight, she allowed herself to feel pride, not in her strength alone, but in her community's, her children's, her country's potential to rise beyond its wounded past. Tonight, she whispered into the wind, no one will ever cage us again. And the wind carried her words, not as a threat, but as a promise that love is stronger than fear, truth is stronger than power, and unity is stronger than division. The park lights glowed brighter. Families gathered their children. Birds settled into the trees for the night. And Olivia Harris, mother, protector, truth teller, stood tall beneath the first emerging stars. A mother who changed her city, a mother who sparked a movement, a mother who showed America what courage looks like. And as the night embraced them, Olivia wrapped her arms around her sons, holding them close, holding them safe, holding them free. In the end, Olivia's story is not just the story of one mother, one park, or one night where injustice tried to bury the truth. It is the story of every parent who has ever feared for their child, every family who has ever been treated as less than, every voice that tried to speak up in a system designed to silence them. Her courage reminds us of something vital. Real change is not born from anger, but from love. Real justice is not built by institutions, but by people. And a stronger America is not handed down from power. It is built from the ground up, by neighbors who choose compassion over fear, unity over division, and truth over silence. Olivia stood up because she loved her sons too fiercely to let the world shrink their future. And in doing so, she gave all of us a blueprint for what courage looks like. Courage to protect the vulnerable. Tinrasur, courage to challenge injustice. Shimonada, courage to believe that our country can be better tomorrow than it was yesterday. Her story teaches us that no badge, no threat, no system is more powerful than a community that chooses to stand together. Because when we support one another, When we listen, when we look out for each other, we become unstoppable. And that is how we build a stronger America. Not through fear, but through love, through unity, through the simple act of refusing to let anyone stand alone. So as you carry this story with you, remember, stand up for your neighbor. Protect those who cannot protect themselves. Choose kindness even when the world feels unkind. And never let racism steal the humanity that belongs to all of us. If Olivia and her boys taught us anything, it's this. When one person stands courageously, millions more find the strength to rise. Call to action. If this story moved you, if it opened your eyes, if it touched your heart, then please subscribe to the Racial Truth Channel to support more powerful stories just like this. Stories that expose truth, uplift communities, and inspire real change. Visit the channel and watch more videos that shine light on injustice while reminding us of our shared humanity. Together, we can learn. Together, we can heal. Together, we can build the America we all deserve. Thank you for watching, and thank you for choosing love.